Okay.
Oh.
So, Fremont, Simpson is not a viable candidate for chief executive of Pod Oil because he has no background in the oil industry.
So
Galindo.
there I would stop and be like, okay, what
Yeah,
does Fremont think?
right.
And it's not that you're not grasping it when you're reading it the first time. It's just going to help you remember it if you read
Right.
it when you go to the answer choices.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So then Fremont values experience in the oil industry. And Simpson's not a good he doesn't think Simpson is a good candidate because they don't have experience.
Yep. So Fremont's not a viable candidate because he doesn't have background in the oil industry. Cool.
Yeah.
And how does G respond?
So G responds by saying, I disagree. An oil industry background is no guarantee of success. Look no further than Pod Oil's last chief executive, who had decades of oil experience, but steered the company to the brink of bankruptcy. So G says that, so basically he's saying that Simpson could be a viable candidate because experience is not necessary. For example, and then he looks at someone else and says, they had experience but still didn't do well.
Does G say, yeah, there's no, okay, but does G say that, that background in the oil industry isn't necessary?
No, it just says that it's not a guarantee of success.
Yes. So G's like, hey, and so what does,
Right.
what does G misread about Fremont?
Yeah. So G says, G is assuming that Fremont is saying that having experience means that you'll be successful.
Yes. Yeah. When really, what is Fremont saying?
Just saying that Simpson is not a viable candidate because they have no experience.
Yeah, where Fremont's only saying that if you don't have experience, then you won't be successful. So this is what Fremont is saying, and this is what Galindo thinks Fremont is saying.
Right.
All right, so this one is going to be, so essentially what he's doing is taking something that he says that Fremont thinks is necessary and acting as if it's sufficient.
Yes. Okay, so
that says that.
Yeah, so it's C, and this is like, I always get confused with this. Like, I think that I'm still getting a little bit confused with necessary and sufficient because when I was narrowing down these answer choices, like C was one of the ones that I narrowed it down to.
Okay.
But I don't think I have like a good grasp necessarily of what that answer choice actually means for me to feel confident to pick it.
Yes. Okay. So have I had you, by the way, have I had you do the flaw drill yet and like translating the answer choices?
No.
I'm going to send that to you. But okay.
Okay.
So what this is saying is rests on confusion between whether an attribute is necessary. So what is necessary just means needed, right? So you confuse whether something that is needed for success and whether that thing is enough to guarantee success.
So when you say necessary, it means needed. And when you say sufficient,
attribute is enough for success, or like I put enough to guarantee there.
Mm-hmm.
So here he rests on confusion between whether an attribute is needed for success, which is what Simpson is thinking, right? Is like experience is needed. So the opposite, so let's take this. The contrapositive of what Fremont said is like, if we are successful, that means that we have experience, right?
Yes.
So what G does is he takes something that he confuses this necessary trait and acts as if it's sufficient.
Right. So
the experience is, so he acts as if Fremont saying that experience is necessary and then confuses it and says, well, you're not right because this person had experience and they're not successful. So therefore you're wrong.
So if something is sufficient, that means that it'll guarantee that something else happens.
Yes, sufficient.
Like if X is sufficient,
triggers are necessary.
So, Okay, so if X is sufficient for Y, if you have X, you definitely have Y.
Yes.
And then if X is necessary for Y, to have Y, you need to have X, but just because you have X doesn't mean you have Y.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, like you know why I get confused? Because necessary sounds like you're guaranteeing something
Yes.
and sufficient doesn't,
Yes.
but it's the opposite.
Sufficient is enough for it. Necessary is just needed.
So I'm gonna even think about like sufficient is enough, and then